talk about food system in general terms, they tend to think that everybody eats the same thing the same way, which is really a very false assumption. There are food preferences which are very different, even within Africa. If you go from Eastern Africa, where I have been eating a lot of nyama choma and kachumbari and other local food, in West Africa, it's more based on millet and other kind of local cereal. So food preference is absolutely important to consider. The other important element, I think, is the issue of food production. You know, and in this food production, let me tell you the following. I was frustrated for a long time to see the food security reports to be only reporting on 5 crops of wheat, maize, and other crops that is now in all international report. But if you take Africa, the food diversity we have is so huge. Only in Kenya, you know, the type of local plants that can yield foods, you know, saps, proteins, beans. These are over hundreds and hundreds of species that are yet untapped in terms of natural product generation and transformation to support the diet and health and well-being of people. But that brings in the issue of food yield and how do we increase food production in Africa. We can't only rely on the traditional, conventional agriculture to address the issue of food yield. We need to reinvent way we do food production by optimizing the natural resources we have, by optimizing the energy we have in Africa, but by also making sure the fertile land we have in our continents are available for vulnerable people. What we can see is that the structural policies we have often tend to capitalize or to be more merchant-oriented, market-oriented, agriculture. How do we deal with exporting food or exporting plants from our soil and balancing it with food crop production? The same piece of land should be really balanced out between cash crop and food crops, and I think this is important. The other thing which I think is coming to my mind is the whole impact of food production on what we call ecosystem services, on biodiversity, on water recycling, on medicinal plants, and many of those functions that communities need. How do we make sure that the knowledge is infused into processes and practices where the balances that we need in nature-based solutions are also embedded into agriculture and food production? And I'm sure all those issues are each by its own a transdisciplinary research area. And by creating this space where people can discuss it, I think you'll raise the right questions and bring the right responses that will take Africa to the next level. I'm personally very interested in food system. That's my hobby. I've been leading IPCC food system chapter, which has just been released. And many of my work has been on food systems. So my soul is with you, my spirit is with you, my body is here in Pretoria. But I'm looking forward to your conclusions and any recording that I would really listen to learn from you, to learn from your diversity and the great work you're doing. So Florence, I congratulate you for this workshop, and I'm looking forward to see your report and to extend it to the donors, the Carnegie Foundation in New York, which have been supporting your fellowship and building the established relationship for you to grow as a leader in science and all the people who are there. To thank Laikipia University for endorsing this research, for keeping in touch, for accepting during this workshop, but also for being part of the network. Because that's what we need in Africa. We need to be connected between us. We need to work together. We need to join our forces in order to advance the transformation and the agenda we need for the continent. I thank you all for your attention. I won't go beyond this. I think everything is in good track. I see the room with many chairs. That means that attendance is high. People are wearing masks, which is great. I think I want everybody to be safe. So enjoy the diversity of food in Kenya. Enjoy the workshop and looking forward to your conclusion. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Kindly, participants, let's give Professor a warm clap.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you. Professor Moore is the director
Okay, kuna classes kama mbili, kuna watu watakuja mmoja 4 mwingine 5.
Will you allow me to give one person?
Wacha ni cancel class ya nani? Class ya Elbago.
Yes, please.
Alikuwa ameniambia anakuja 4.
Kindly.
Wacha ni cancel yake.
Good afternoon, Prof.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, it's a privilege to have you around. Now, my question is on food production. I want to know, when did climate change started influencing food production in Africa? And has it really been mitigated, if you are aware? Just that. When did climate change started influencing food production in Africa? And has it really been mitigated? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And this is a huge question. The person who asked the question did not introduce himself, but I thank him very much for that. The real impact of climate change are manifold, and there are direct impact and indirect impact. Let me start with the direct impact. You all know, and particularly in Kenya last year, you have seen a lot of pests and locust invasions. You have seen a lot of locusts coming and destroying quite seriously the production of local communities, the smallholder farmers, the small acre where they rely on to get their maize, to get their cereal, has been literally destroyed by locusts last year. One example. Another examples that can easily come in is the more frequency of fires that are coming and destroying the production that is happening. And not the least, I have been in Kenya for 5 years working at the World Agroforestry Center. I know some areas of Kenya has been undergoing a serious drought and high climate variability. You know, slow onset of the rainy season, early end of the rainy season, and all the water cycle in Kenya and many places in Africa has been disturbed by what we call high climate variability and climate change. And if you add onto those aspects, the increase of temperature, and we have seen it, Nairobi is getting warmer and every places in Kenya is getting warmer. This increased temperature will increase evaporation, it increase water loss, and this evaporation and all the factors which I just mentioned have direct impact on agriculture. So now let's put the analysis and see how much people will respond to climate change when they don't have enough food to eat. They tap into forest. Mau forest has been depleted so seriously. I've been in Nakuru, between Nakuru and Laikipia. There is some forest in the hills there, which has been deforested for charcoal, for fuel wood. And that has an impact on the soil fertility. It's an indirect impact in the way that the climate change will bring people to do adaptive measures that can, be an impediment for the soil fertility and the climate, stability we need. But now, in global terms, what climate change is doing is that there is more demand for land for biofuel, and there is more trade-related impact related to food that will impact directly the way we use our land. You have seen a lot of conflicts now coming between, for instance, the herders. Some of them are Maasais, and the conservation areas where we have national parks. They want to put their animal inside because there is no pasture land outside. It would be very difficult, my colleague, to tell you when it really started, but that's something we have seen. That's something which is protracted, and that's something which is encompassing. Everywhere you go in Africa, it's the same side of challenge. What we are trying to do here at Future Africa is to put a network of African scientists, we are almost 70 now, to work on a program which is called CLAP Africa, Climate, Land, Agriculture, and Biodiversity, to bring the bottom-up knowledge, the local knowledge which has been ignored, the knowledge that are produced by Laikipia University, by Egerton University, by Nairobi University. Those information address the issue locally, but it's ignored by IPCC, it's ignored by IPBS, it's ignored by the Global Environmental Outlook. Those global outlooks and synthesis do not take the type of information you guys are producing. And the information you are making are the one which are addressing the local issue. That's where the leadership we want to establish in Africa is a reverse linkage leadership, where people who are seen as low in the scale, but producing the information that address the local issues, the local problem, are the one we promote, rather than just promoting the general and non-practical information generated by IPCC. It's a it's a big question you're asking. I wish we can have a workshop to debate about that. But this is my short response to a very great question.
Thank you, Professor. There is one gentleman who has a bad question. I can see smoke. From the gentleman.
I did not hear you well.
There's a man who has one question, only one for you.
Okay, that's fine. I'm here for you.
No, thank you, Prof. I am Dr. Kello from Egerton University. Now, my question is, thank you for the good discussion that you have had from you, but I wanted to know, how can we secure our food system to be resilient and sustainable? This is given the fact that in the last year there's been locust invasion, especially in Kenya. We have had
Yes.
COVID-19, and this thing has really disrupted our food system. And most of our farmers are not even able to access the markets, they're not able to get inputs. So how can we be able to make our food system resilient and sustainable? Thank you.
I was pretty sure that such a question will come from Egerton University. They have been quite advanced in developing community approach and getting information reaching to communities. And thank you for the question. There are many ways resilient agriculture and food system can be established. First of all, to address climate change. That's really an issue that relates to the previous question. But think of it, there is a lot of rain, there is a lot of still water in Kenya. During the 5 years I was there, being just on the equator, we have a lot of water coming in Kenya. But what do we do about that water? We let it flow, it goes and do flooding in Nairobi, create issues on the street. We did not manage well the rainfall water to serve the purpose of micro irrigation and boost the production of food in various places. Water harvesting, making sure that when the sky open its state for us, we get the water and use it for production. That's number one action we can explore. The other action we have to explore is quality seed, is to make sure that we are working on productive seed, and they're not necessarily genetically, manipulated seeds. It can be traditional seeds. It can be varieties that in Nakuru, in southern Kenya, in the areas semi-arid of Turkana area. Everything we have as local plant, which has some genetic values in terms of resisting to drought, should not be ignored. And we did not do enough research to make sure that our local varieties, which are resistant to many of the things we are facing now, are promoted as a way to respond to climate change. And to get that information on seeds quality, certified seed, production of seeds that the community can use, the traditional way of communication, which is using English and French in Africa to vehiculate those information, I think should be revisited. My point is, the social networks in all African countries, including Kenya, those social networks are very powerful conduit through which information can be generated. And there are several forms and nature of relationship that are established between village to village, between peer to peer, between county to county, that should be explored really seriously in order to bring the due knowledge that we need to have to bring to the communities to thrive. So communication, information. Population do not need food aid. They need information. They need to be trained on how to do things differently to increase their productivity. Another area we have to investigate, my colleague from Egerton, is the point I mentioned on neglected plants. In West Africa, you probably know from my accent that I'm from Senegal. I've been working internationally, and I'm now in Pretoria. But the number of plants that my ancestors was eating, and probably our colleagues there who are over 50 can have the same impression. The diversity of food you had in your village is getting smaller. We are eating few crops. We are eating maize and few leaves, and the rest is protein, animal protein. But how many of those plants traditionally used in our villages is now still promoted? And you will find them nowhere in our agricultural policy. In Senegal policy, they don't use nenefers, they don't use fonio, they don't use cowpeas. There is none of those policies that address the local plants. And neglected plants, to me, is a way to create the stability we want and the diversity we want, to have a good diet that is very appropriate for the context, as you mentioned, COVID-19. We cannot address COVID-19 without having a good immune system. And all diseases that are happening in Africa we face it. We face dengue, we face yellow fever, we face Ebola, we face now corona, just because of the way we used to eat, and now we are very westernized, unfortunately. We're eating too much pizza and too much hamburgers, and those things I'm not sure will give us the right ingredients and nutrients that put our immune system at a level to sustain some of these diseases we have. So let's go back to our traditional practices, which are neglected practices. Let's go back to our traditional crops that are neglected crops, and let's find the domestic solutions from our domestic assets. That is the diversity of plant we have. I stop it there, I pause it there. That's my response to that question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Let's clap. Prof.
Thank you.
Florence, I have a question for Prof.
Hello?
Hello, I have a question for Prof.
Who's speaking?
Mercy. Mercy.
And he is supposed to go back for the meeting. Actually, he has requested for 10 minutes. So, Prof, kindly we will forward the questions later for you to respond.
Right. Okay, that's fine. If you can forward the question. Merci, I'm sorry. I'm waiting for another meeting, but I will be happy to be with you all the time and to greet my colleagues and to discuss with you. So we keep in touch. Florence.
Let me just put this across. I've realized that you have a wealth of information regarding how we can transform the food system. And with me as serious early career researchers and scientists. So my request is that we can organize for another forum later, perhaps because of the year, before the end of the year, so that we can engage more on these particular subjects.
All right. Now, I agree. I think I would be really willing to come to Lake Pia, which is one of the rare universities I did not visit in Kenya, but I heard great things. Mercy, that would be an opportunity for you and I to meet and to discuss. I thank you for that opportunity. We'll take it very seriously. France, you will contact me and we'll make plans.
Say hi to your team, Amelia and Tisha. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, folks. Enjoy your time.
Thank you. Enjoy.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, merci, bye.
I know students had a number of questions, but because we had actually stretched out of a meeting just to address it, that's why we had to limit the questions. But he has committed to organize for a similar event so that we can further engage on this subject matter. Sinisawa? Huh? Great. So let me hand over to Dr. Gakobo, who will take us through the next session. Thank you.
All protocols observed. Good afternoon, all. Thank you very much. I want to welcome you for session 5. We are going to have 3 presentations.
Good afternoon. I'm Ronald Nyamwamu, and I'd like to share with you my paper that is entitled The Effectiveness of the Desert Locust Control Methods and a Case of the Small-Scale Farmers in Meru County, Kenya. I have started by giving an introduction of what is the importance of agriculture, that we all know globally, in Africa and also in Kenya, that agriculture is very important. Despite being important, there are several challenges that it's facing. For example, in the world, we have poor quality land. And this is caused by the degradation that makes it less productive. There are also effects of climate change, which causes or results in floods, drought, pest diseases, and a reduction of water supply that is to be used for agriculture. In Kenya, that is also the same, and in addition, we have inadequate extension services, as I had been highlighted in the morning. We also have problems of human-wildlife conflict. We also have pests, and in particular, we have the locust infestation that we experienced recently in Kenya. That is how a locust looks like. We have had that as from 2019 in Kenya, 2019 December. And a desert locust is a special kind of pest that is short-horned. It is mobile. It changes behavior, especially when it is in groups. It is able to migrate in long distances, and a swarm can contain up to 40 or even 80 million insects. In most cases, the locust moves by wind. This locust has a potential of causing significant crop damage. It can feed on leaves, shoots, flowers, stem, and even the bark. It can eat all the crop and non-crop plants. And it's estimated that 1 kilometer square of the locusts can eat the same amount of feed that can be eaten by 35,000 people. As you can see, that's how it feeds. It can destroy both crop and non-crop plants. There was an upsurge of locusts in 1986 up to 1989, and also in 2003 up to 2005. And it significantly threatened food security, especially in the developing countries and even in Kenya. And it is worth to note that the desert locust infested Kenya recently. That was in December 2019. And as I said, it has a potential of causing significant crop damage. For example, in 1954, somewhere in Sudan, about 167,000 tons of grain was destroyed and in Ethiopia, 1958, it was able to destroy feed that could feed over 1 million people. So what happens if it invades Kenya? About 70,000 hectares of land had been invested by March. It had entered into Kenya 2019 December, and by March, more than 70,000 hectares had been destroyed. It affected areas in Mandera County, Marsabit, Isiolo, Garissa, Wachir, and others. And it is worth to note that in those areas, in Meru County, the climatic conditions are suitable for its survival, so it can easily multiply and increase in population. What are the methods used in Kenya? The small-scale farmers tend to use the following methods to control the desert locusts. Some of them dig trenches, they bury hoppers. Some of them use they scare those insects off their farms. Some of them make noise, and they can even beat the hoppers. That is what we can see. Some of them are trying to chase the insects away from their farms. Is that effective? Some of them make noise. They want to beat the insects so that they don't destroy. But I'm saying that even if they use those methods, those are just mechanical. Sometimes they can go back, they can run away from their farms and come back. that means they are not effective. And then later the government of Kenya intervened because it realized these farmers are getting affected, they are losing their crop. It came with the chemicals that were being sprayed. That's what we are able to see. They were spraying by use of hand, and sometimes there were vehicles that were moving, were mounted with the pumps. It even involved the use of aeroplanes to spray that. But I'm saying that although the agriculture is important, the desert locust has invested Kenya. Several methods have been used by both small-scale farmers and also the government. We have not been effective. That means farmers are still susceptible, they are likely to lose significant crop, and that makes them prone to food insecurity. So this study sought to find out, what about in Meru County? Are the methods being used by small-scale farmers effective? And if not, what is to be their food security status? So I did this study by use of document review and analysis, and this is what I found out, that since farmers in other parts of Kenya that were experiencing locust invasion used those methods, even in Meru County they also used those methods, which include digging of the trenches. They were beating the locusts. They were burning tires, use that heat and the smoke to chase them away from their farms. They were making loud noise to scare them. I'm saying that I realized that these methods were not effective, and that is why we could find that the numbers were not increasing. So the locusts were able to move from one farm to another farm. The same, even when the government initiated that process. Remember, it is spraying requires that the insect comes into contact with the chemical. Sometimes they can also escape, they can run away. That means they will still continue reproducing and moving to other farms, destroying the crops. Unfortunately, it is worth to note that the outbreak of those locusts coincided with a rain season. In March, around March and May, that is when we have a rain season in Kenya. That means there is enough feed, there is enough fodder for the insects to feed on, and therefore increase in number. And I want to note that when we don't control those insects in time, in good time, we are not able to fight or to work towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal number 1. So number what? Number 1, yes. And at the same time, when we use those chemicals, we interfere or we do not support the achievement of goal number 3, that is on good, healthy, and well-being. Sustainable Development Goal number 6, clean water and sanitation, because those chemicals can infiltrate, can percolate, can enter into the soil, and finally land into the water bodies. Number 14, that is, it moves down into the soil and enter into the water sources. It's the same for land. Soil can be polluted, and that reduces the productivity of the soil. The effectiveness probably could be caused even the precaution that the government or the agents who are spraying that chemical are taking, that if we overspray, then we can pollute the environment. And that could reduce the effectiveness of that technique or method of controlling. Consequently, because the insects continue increasing in number, you may end up having large volumes of the pesticide being applied. Such a scenario occurred in the year 2003 when an upsurge of locusts affected 24 countries in West Africa, Near East and Southern Europe, where 13 million hectares of locust infestation was sprayed with pesticides. Could it be the case with Kenya? That is, if you spray today, you don't kill those insects. You spray tomorrow, you spray even for a month. What happens? Then acquiring a large amount of insecticide and their application requires significantly large amounts of resources. You may find that immediately after an invasion of those locusts or an outbreak, you may not have the money that is enough to acquire the pesticides and even have the aeroplanes and even the vehicles to move around, that could reduce the effectiveness of that strategy. That could also be affected by lack of inadequate funds and supplies for locust control, can also affect the effectiveness of the strategy. Finally, I want to conclude by saying that the farmers, the small-scale farmers in Meru County, were not able to control or are not able to control the desert locusts. The reason is that the methods that they use are not effective. That means they will be susceptible to food insecurity because their crops will be destroyed. Concluding by saying that after realizing that the locusts were causing great damage, those chemicals that were being used by the government also were not promptly effective. And this could imply that small-scale farmers would continue experiencing significant crop losses. Some of them could lose income. They will become food insecure and even a source of livelihood because their crops has been destroyed. What do I recommend? That there is a need to conduct research so that we determine how much of, for example, maize crop is destroyed by a farmer. Second recommendation is that there is a need for us to conduct a research so that we we develop locust control strategies that are affordable to small-scale farmers. That is, if we want to use aeroplane, can small-scale farmers afford that? So we develop strategies that are effective and affordable to the small-scale farmers. I also recommend that the government should establish a migratory pest monitoring and control infrastructure and also allocate budgets for monitoring and controlling the desert locusts, such that we are able to determine there are signs or indicators that very soon locusts are likely to invade. And then you come up with control strategies. How do we control in case they come? And then finally, I'm recommending that we develop environment-friendly desert locust control pesticides that can be used. That is the end of my presentation, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Now, for the benefit of time, I only allow one question. Since we are here with him, Dr. Nyamon will be available for many other questions that we have. We will just present to him and he will give us the response. So I'll allow only one question. Yes, please.
I'm sorry, my name is Justice Chimone. A linguist. So I have weird questions, I'm sorry. Now, my question is, where do these locusts come from? You said they started with the heavy rains. Maybe we could go to the root of the problem and uproot it once and for all so that we don't have this problem anymore. So where do they come from?
If I can respond to that, is locusts are simply living. They are living organisms. In most cases, they live outside the country, Kenya, but they entered Kenya through the Somalia and Ethiopia route in the year 2019, around December 2019.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
The other questions, please, just present them to our secretary there, and we shall give you a direct response. So, I want to welcome the second presenter, who is Dr. Justice.
Okay, so maybe we do some bit of language matters, and I've been really helped by the professor who said that populations don't really need aid they need information. And so when you talk about information, we come in to look at that communication and how it happens. So my presentation is on discursive construction of climate change agenda in Kenya. I'll share a few thoughts in this regard, and then we see whether we can have a conversation. So, okay, when something is said to be discursive, it is said to be discursively constructed when it comes into existence through a collective act of language, written or spoken. And so when I'm saying climate change can be discursively constructed, I'm actually talking about the very many actors involved. There will be scientists, there will be government, there will be the farmers, there will be everybody. So how are they involved? The kind of network, SDG, goal number, I don't know which one, but there's cooperation and networking. So these people come together to form a collage of actors in this area. So climate change is a scientific phenomenon. And I'm speaking to the right audience. Scientists, you people, ladies and gentlemen, discover an environmental problem, and then you identify potential solutions to that problem. Then you will create public awareness to foment action. So the question would be how you create that public awareness to foment whatever action you want taken to mitigate the effects of climate change, or rather, maybe to express your new findings on the new trends in climate change. Now, there are these different actors who are involved here, and all of them address challenges. Okay, scientists will address the challenges. They will set priorities for, okay, all these actors will address challenges of climate change, like we are doing in this conference. They will also set priorities for new knowledge and frame key questions and actions. So, according to these sustainable goals focus on leaving no one behind, everyone must therefore be involved. Information about climate change, its effects, and mitigation measures must be communicated in a language that is suitable to everyone. So this is when now we say language matters from this point going forward. When we begin talking about communicating effects and mitigation measures on climate change to the different actors who are supposed to take responsible or other suitable action. The approach I'm imagining here and what I'm using for this kind of work is text linguistic approach, which is based on lexical indications of domain, and domain is context of use. So we use the terminology that we use, the vocabulary, that's all lexical items in language. And so here we can assess, for example, in my situation, I'm interested in assessing government reports, the media reports, both print and electronic, YouTube, and whatever other sources that you may find that carry information on climate change, whether by its definition, maybe the definition will keep changing at some point, or the effects of climate change and the mitigation measures that come from science. So I start with the Kenya National Adaptation Plan 2015 and 2030, and as you know, the government of Kenya has had so many of these towards mitigating the effects of climate change. And when I look at this report, this action plan 2015-2030, it is loaded with words which are very interesting to me. As a linguist, I'm like, okay, so here there is the use of, these are just auxiliary verbs, will and shall. And they're not just ordinary verbs when they're used in reports like this or in documents like this, or when you use them in contracts. When you say will and shall, of course, the implementation of the different actions, that's what the statement says. Roles are summarized as: 1, national government secretariat, sectorial agencies will, there is some information coming after will, county governments shall, and so will and shall are icons of requirements that bind. It's like in a contract, when someone says you shall, it's like you have no option but to do what is required of you. Now, the problem here is that enforcement, Enforcement mechanisms are not even specified in this document. I looked at it, and so the government will talk, this report talks of, this document talks of county governments shall, the media shall, academicians and research institutions will carry out research, but of course now there is need to follow up that action to make sure that it's enforceable. And that is the bit that is lacking in documents like this. We assume that the government is committed, or whoever is supposed to be implementing this kind of mitigating measures knows what they are supposed to do without recourse to anybody to be accountable to, because it's not stated very explicitly. The Kenya National Climate Change Action Plan 2018-2022 has this thing here, this statement. The Climate Change Action Plan helps further Kenya's development aspirations and seeks. So, as a linguist, you'll have to pardon me here, because in linguistics, the word seeks here is tries. So there are very heavy words coming after seeks, but of course, it only tries. So this plan will only try. It's not doing anything. It's only trying. And that is why sometimes, as I think about it, it's like, well, did they mean to do anything? They were trying. So because the verb used there is try. So we're looking at how that message is constructed so that at the end of the day we see, from my perspective, as to whether the report is enforceable or we expect any action to come out of it. Now, the academia and research institutions, this group of actors plays a key role in building the country's adaptive capacity, and they will provide the evidence for knowledge-based decision-making by other actors through research conducted on different aspects of climate change adaptation and resilience, including improving the understanding of climate change attribution in Kenya and providing information. Now, this is where now we have to collaborate. As I said earlier, science will carry out the research, will do the experiments, will have their own scientific information, which then has to be propagated to the different actors in matters climate change, with a view to improving the understanding of climate change attribution in Kenya. The Kenyan news media is a very important actor here, because they are the people who translate, they're supposed to be translating this information, like these reports, broken down into a language that, say, the public, including everyone, can understand for action. But an analysis of the news in Kenya will mostly, of course, media in Kenya is mostly preoccupied with the negative impacts of climate change. Okay, with climate change, negative impacts of climate change, they will talk of rising sea levels, heavy downpour, and dry spells to be witnessed. And they could also, in a way, misrepresent very complex scientific language, hence expose the audience to alarmist perceptions of reality. There's need for responsible journalism, and there's a lot of work that they need to do. They need to dig deeper into scientific information so that they can break it down for everyone. Then commitment to action. Common responsibility for solutions to tackle climate change through pronouns such as we and all. So when you ask people about who, the question who is supposed to take action, they will say, we will do this, and all of us have to do this. And in my analysis, we and all do not mean anybody in particular. It's just like someone telling you, I will see you anytime, because anytime is no time. So people are not willing to take action at an individual level. So who are these? Are they all the people in Kenya or all the people in the world? And you're asking a specific question to an individual. Kenyans are clear, of course, about the fact that something should be done to tackle the climate change, but they have divergent views on whose responsibilities the proposed actions are. Generally, they claim that something must be done and that all should contribute and take responsibility, and they will only express a vague willingness to take responsibility. So in some of these reports, you find this NCCP of 2013 to 2017, they talk of the government has made considerable progress and they talk of something like substantial change. It is not really measurable, because when you say considerable change has been made, considerable advancements have been made, it's like it's not quantifiable. So if there was anything tangible that was done, then the reporting has to be very concise, very precise, so that we know we are moving from percentage this one to another percentage for better action. Way forward, there's need for awareness creation, targeting specific groups and communities and using different tools and media such as the print and electronic media, drama, community forums, and they have this in the report, so everyone has to come on board. There's need for clarity as to what individuals and institutions can do and enforce that responsibility. That responsibility, apart from just appearing in documents, has to be enforceable. A better alignment is needed for better alignment between decision makers and the citizenry at the lowest point of implementation, so that these reports can be consumed in the best way possible as intended for best results. Asante sana. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes. Good afternoon once more. Again, I hope you can see my shared screen. Good. My name's again Esther Muhindi from Pwani University. I was earlier on presenting on acidic soils, but I'm coming in again on with a different presentation on the performance of onion in titanium mined soils. This presentation is joined with the two presentations on titanium mined soils which were presented yesterday. They are coming from the same research where we had established several crops to check on their performance on as a rehabilitation measure of these mined soils. This presentation is prepared by several authors. There is Jackson Molinge and Andrew Wamkota, who we've been working together in the project. The picture that I'm going to show is just to have a synopsis of the mining area and the way the soils are returned and the onions which are growing in our research plots and some of the harvest that we've already harvested. To give us more background on the mining and also onion, we know mining is an important activity that promotes income generation and job creation and is also a source of industrial raw material and industrialization globally. Despite the important role played by mining globally, mining is normally associated with land degradation because it destroys our natural ecosystem by destroying vegetation and also destroying background biota and also soil physical, chemical, and biological properties. So for us agriculturists, we look at mining as an enemy because it degrades our land, our agricultural land. Once mining is completed, we normally have post-mining reclamation activities, which differs from the mining process to another. If the mining process is a process which does not pollute the ecosystem, it will be different from post-mining activities or reclamation activities for a mining process which was using some pollutants. And in overall, the post-mining reclamation activity involves returning the source in the excavations, then allowing mostly the indigenous plants to recolonize mossong grasses, local shrubs, trees, and if it was a good mining process where the soil was not polluted and the environment was not polluted, some food crops can also be established. When we look at Base Titanium Limited, where this research was done, is one of the largest mining companies within the country, and they normally target 3 minerals, that is ilmenite, rutile, and zircon, which are used in making paints and also in ceramics. This mining process is, they normally do a safe mining process because they use water separation and hydraulic processes and magnetic processes. So they don't use pollutants, and it involves clearing the land. Then after clearing the land, they normally remove the topsoil and put it on one side. And after removing the topsoil that is part of the air horizon, they mix the other air horizon up to sea horizon with water, and after mixing, they pump it to the mineral separation plant. In the mineral separation plant, they normally separate clay and sand. Then after separating, they use magnetic processes to extract the iron or the titanium, which is part of iron. Then after that, they normally mix the sand with clay again and start the refilling process. Then after refilling and compacting the sea horizon up to the air horizon, they normally go back to the original topsoil which they had put aside and spread on top. This original soil which is spread on the top is the one which is loose because all the others are compacted, and it ranges from 0 to around 30 centimeters, depending on the uniformity of the spreading. In some areas, you find that the way they have spread, it has an elevation of less than 5%. And those areas is where we are targeting to see, because this land initially was used for food production by the local people of Msabweni, to see whether, instead of establishing everywhere with grass and trees, we can have some portion where the locals can start producing food with the minimum degradation of the land to aid in their promoting food security. Most of these areas, because of the shallowness of the soil, is normally good to establish shallow-rooted crops. And one of the shallow-rooted crops that we chose was onion, because onion requires minimal, it is a shallow-rooted crop, and it also requires less management, and it can also do well in sandy soils, sandy tested soils. And again, is a vegetable which is commonly grown in eastern part of Kenya, Central and Rift Valley, and also in the coastal region, which can be grown by small-scale farmers from both local and export market. This, when we chose this onion as one of the crops to test and see whether farmers can be able to produce it in future after the mining process is finished, we started the research with one objective: to evaluate the performance of bulb onions on titanium mine soils as a rehabilitation measure. And we were to first check on the role of farmyard manure, then the role of inorganic fertilizer, and the role of combining manure and inorganic fertilizer on the growth of onion and also yield of onion in these soils. The experiment was set up in one site which has already been finished, mine has been finished, called South Dune, and the experiment was set up in randomized complete block design. The treatment that was used, fertilizer, that is DAP fertilizer, manure plus fertilizer, and a control which did not have any input. Then the variety of onion that was used is the common red Creole. The whole experiment started by taking initial soil sampling, which was taken up to 0 to 30 centimeters depth. And after that, when the crop was established, we took growth parameters, data on growth parameters, and then data on yield. And all the data was analyzed using GenStat and mean separated using Duncan new multiple range test. This is some of the procedures that was followed during soil analysis. And this picture shows, it's just a synopsis of the plants when they are growing. The one which is in the lower is in the first season. We had a problem with drainage. When it dries a little bit, the soil was drying very fast because they are shallow. The soil profile is very shallow. Then again, when it rains too much, we had a problem with some waterlogging conditions. But in the second season, it was much better. The crop did a little bit better. After the analysis, we found that, sorry, the soils, they have very low fertility levels, like phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen, organic carbon. But most of the nutrients like sodium, iron, because the soils they are sesquiocytes, they are iron-based. Most of the other nutrients were enough, but the most important nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, they were very low. Then also the sand content was very high, 80% vis-a-vis clay. That means the soils have a problem with the water holding capacity and nutrient holding capacity. After planting the crops, we noted that there was no difference in the number of leaves in all the treatments, which is expected because for onions, the growth is almost the same. Only the size will differ, but the number of leaves will be almost uniform. But for the plant height, we noted that the treatments, the plots which were treated with a fertilizer, that is DAP, and DAP plus manure had the highest plant height, while the others was very low. There was not much difference between control and manure, which is expected because these are new soils. They are disturbed soils, so their soil structure is very poor. And once we put manure in 1 or 2 seasons, manure will take long when it's trying to being mineralized and building the soil structure. So we noted that manure in the first season and the second season did not differ in promoting plant height compared to the control. Also, where we applied DAP and where we applied DAP and manure, there was no difference, which is simply can be explained with the role of manure and the sequence it takes to develop the soil structure and also to mineralize to give nutrients. The same scenario was also seen in the average bulb diameter. You can also see that manure plus fertilizer and fertilizer, they had almost similar range of measurements, and also in bulb neck diameter. The same sequence was also evident in the yield, that is the average fresh bulb yield, and then dry matter weight of the bulbs. Now, in conclusion, because the the yield was very high. For manure plus fertilizer was around 24.8 tons per hectare. When we look at the yield with the little management which was done, we can conclude that these soils are good and they have potential to support onion production. But continuous application of manure and fertilizer is recommended to ensure that the soil continues to grow and the soil physical and biological and chemical properties continues to develop, because these soils are still weak and not well developed. Then again, because the soils are shallow due to refilling process, we noted that when there is a lot of water, so when it rained a lot, there was a lot of rotting, because the layer of the soil is very shallow and there is the tendency of water to come up because it cannot penetrate the compacted area. Because of this, we recommended that there is need for another research to be done to check the amount of irrigation water we should be applied to manage nutrient holding capacity, water holding capacity, ensure that the soils continue developing very well and the farmers still get optimal yields. I would like to acknowledge Base Titanium for funding this project, and again also the program for allowing me to share my research findings. It should be noted that this research is still going on. We've only done 2 seasons, and it will be completed after another 2 seasons. So the recommendations are not full until we do the next 2 seasons to make sure that we've gotten the long-term potential of the crops in these soils. Thank you very much. Thank you, too.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is a very important session because we are dealing with the round table, and I have a very humble and precious task of introducing the top players in the round table session. First of all, I'd want to introduce the chair for this session, Dr. Samuel Owino Onyuma. Dr. Samuel Onyuma is a senior lecturer of finance in the School of Business at Laikipia University. He's a very good friend of mine and a very prudent researcher. He has won research grants with the World Bank and also the Council for the Development of Social Science Research in Africa, whose acronym is CODESRIA. His research interests are in the area of financial markets and their link with agribusiness sector. Let us give Dr. Onyuma a deserved round of applause. Secondly, and I pray that I'll not be monotonous, I want to introduce Professor Dankit Nasuma. Professor Dankit Nasuma is a valued statistician. He holds Bachelor of Science Statistics honors from University of Nairobi, MSc Statistics from University of Manitoba, and PhD Statistics from University of Manitoba, Canada. He is the former Vice Chancellor, Kabarak University. Currently, he is the Vice Chancellor of African International University, Karen, Nairobi. I know for sure that Professor Nasuma served as a director of graduate school, Egerton University. He is a distinguished researcher, a distinguished consultant, and also a valuable lecturer. Among other things, he was the manager of Kenya Households for Integrated Budget Survey, and also the National Statistical System StatCap projects, sponsored by the World Bank, IDA, DFID, and Government of Kenya. He's a board member of various organizations. I'll only mention a few. One, Commission for Higher Education, and is also the chairman of Inter-Christian Fellowship's Evangelical Mission Board. He has got very rich experience in efficient consultants leadership, research, and has published in several books and refereed journals. Last but not least, Professor Dankit Nasuma has supervised very many postgraduate students, some of whom stand out as lecturers in various universities. May we kindly give Professor Dankit Nasuma a hearty welcoming clap. This ritual is necessary because it is important. Thirdly, I want to introduce Professor Tom Decker from Uppsala, Sweden, Uppsala University, Sweden. For those of us who are early career researchers, if I were one of you, and I'm one of you, after this session, I would quickly do a search of Uppsala, because it's indeed a great university. Professor Decker is an associate professor at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, Uppsala, in the Department of Plant Protection Biology. He has got very rich research experience that focuses on fundamentals and applied aspects of chemical ecology for sustainable innovation of production systems. That is very precise. May we once again appreciate the presence of Professor Tom Decker. Number 4, it is my privilege and honor to introduce Dr. Alice Nahumwicha Murithi. She is currently the chairperson of the Department of Agricultural Economics and Agribusiness Management at Jaramogi Oginga Odinga University of Science and Technology. She holds Bachelor of Science, from Guelph, Ontario in Canada. She also holds her Master of Science degree from the same university and a PhD from Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. She is a seasoned researcher who has also co-authored the World Bank grant that established the African Center of Excellence for sustainable use of insects for food and feed. She has supervised very many postgraduate students and also taught very many undergraduate students. May we put our hands together to heartily welcome Dr. Murithi. Lastly, it is my profound pleasure to introduce Mr. William Natali Kea, who has got very rich experience in the themes of this conference and really practical experience. Mr. Kea is a holder of master's degree in rural development honors from the National University of Ireland, University College of Galway. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Intercongregational Sustainable Agriculture Program, Kenya, Uganda, and Southern Sudan, and also the Chief Executive Officer of East Africa Beekeeping Livelihood Program. He is also the chairperson of Baraka Agricultural College. This is a college with Catholic inclinations which has done visible work in agriculture, particularly in Nakuru and the whole of Kenya. May we please welcome Mr. William Kerr to this session. Thank you very much. I wish you a very fruitful round table.
Thank you very much. If I will be able to answer that question, I think this conference would not be needed, or the roundtable discussion would not be needed. But yeah, this is a $1 million question, isn't it? There's so many angles to it. And one of the things is, of course, that we have been hijacking the ecosystems for way too long, and the effect of which are very visible in climate change and eroding of landscapes. So the Sustainable Development Goals are very clear in aiming to find more sustainable solutions. And there's not an easy answer to that, but education is key, and education is key. There's no way that we can progress without a sustainable transformation in our agricultural systems. By the way, this is the same problem we have in the north as we have in Africa. Here in Sweden, we also struggle with the same issues. Climate change is hitting us. And so the questions are not restricted to geographical regions, but are really global. I don't know how to approach this question in a sense. I'm very much a disciplinary scientist, and I always try to sort of reach out to the larger community to see how we can funnel innovations into getting it into the right hands, because it's not only about getting the innovations. Many people have very many good ideas, but the structures are not there to support it. So it's a very complex question. Even when there are innovations, sometimes they end up in drawers. And we see this all too much. But one of the things that's really important is to get things out of drawers is mobilize people that have knowledge and know where those drawers are. And the other thing that's really important is regulation, strong institutions. One of the things that we find a lot, and we're struggling with this in Sweden and Europe in general, sustainable innovation, for example, with pest control, which is my field of expertise. There are many sustainable innovations, but the problem is that the more sustainable you make it, the more niche market you are as well. As a result, sustainable innovations oftentimes don't penetrate markets because just for registration and the costs of entering a market, it's oftentimes not worth it anymore. So a very strong regulation side, very important for pushing for sustainable transformation. But I'm maybe not addressing your question directly. So could you, could you rephrase or yeah, tell me.
Thank you very much for having me on this forum. I think the question of food system is very key for us here in Kenya. I find it the same in Uganda, South Sudan. And one question somebody would ask is, when did we last transform our food system? When we look at the health system, it has gone through numerous transformations. When you look at our transport system, it has undergone a lot of transformations. Some of them are good, some of them are not good. But when it comes to the food system, we don't know whether the question should be forming a food system or transforming a food system. But definitely there is need to examine the food system in Kenya and in Africa that is inclusive, that is resilient, and that is sustainable. When we look at history, and allow me just to share with you a long history back in the 1800s. In the mid-1800s, the Irish people suffered famine. And this famine, it is said in history that it was caused by a certain blight, the lead blight that affected the potato for about 3-4 years consecutively. And it led to close to 1 million people dying and 500,000 migrating to the US. And we can ask ourselves, was the issue a food system? What was the food system like? What happened for 3 years that the food system wasn't put in place to stop people from dying? It's also said that when a food system is left vulnerable to externalities, like it happened in Ireland, we find that whereas the potato wasn't there for the common person, the wheat was there, the barley was there, but it was being exported out. And we still see the same thing even in Africa, in Kenya. It has happened several times in Kenya when we have had very good pamba harvest, and the next thing you don't hear where that harvest went, and the next thing is that we are bringing in maize from outside. And by that time, people are suffering, and they are not even able to access the food that is coming in from outside. So there is a huge And I think the institutions of higher learning, the universities, we need to look at re-examine our curriculum, re-examine our extension services, and be able to inform adequately the policymakers. If you look at the landscape of Kenya today, you see the silos, tall ones, but they are empty. And so there is a need for higher education universities to research into what kind of food system we have in Kenya and in Africa, what are the gaps, who are the participants, who are the stakeholders, who are benefiting. Definitely the smallholder farmer is not in any way benefiting at all. That would be my initial thoughts on that question.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Now, looking at the role of the university and therefore the curriculum development, which is key or their core mandate for the university, we in the university have maybe not moved up with the times as we should have, because it is the university that is actually looked at as this powerful institution that should be able to come up with the required information, or rather build the capacity in the young people to be able to come up with the innovations that are required in the changing environment. Yet, it can be said that most of the institutions have remained with curriculums that are not revised as often as they should. And that is not because there isn't that information within the institutions. It may be a governance thing, because curriculums are supposed to be reviewed, and we are supposed to have stakeholder meetings. We're supposed to know that what we are teaching is actually what is required out there. But we, maybe in most universities, even to hold a stakeholders meeting that is really meaningful, you find that it is a very expensive exercise. To review a curriculum usually costs a lot. And also, if in case of agriculture, you know, there's hue and cry, and everybody understands that we should move away from the industrial type of agriculture and move to an intermediate sort of food system which serves us better in terms of diets, in terms of health, in terms of sustainability for the environment. But what is preventing us? I know that the information is out there. These curriculums can be designed because within these institutions the capacity is there. But is it governance? Is it that we put it, for example, the School of Agriculture in most institutions, is it given that high priority? Is agriculture given the resources that it should? So that, okay, food systems are multidisciplinary, but are we given the required, or are our programs prioritized so that we could actually make the required change? I'm happy at the moment that we are having TVET also coming on board as at the university. I know that when you have an institution that is recognized out there as having sound practices. For example, I'm an alumni of Egerton, and everybody knows that somebody who went and did a diploma in Egerton was hands-on, and if you employed them, they did the proper thing. But if you went to Egerton, you would also see the same things. Now, right now, because of lack of resources, big classes, you find that most of the institutions have a School of Agriculture, but they do not have the facilities. They may not even have the required acreage to practice what they're teaching theoretically. So they wait for the students to go out on practical or attachment in order to acquire these skills. So I think for me, there needs to be more thought into investing at that school level so that proper resources are put in, prioritized, and we come out with better training. So that would be my take for that.
Thank you very much. What is emerging is that the cost of transforming agricultural food chain is high. That being the case, then it means that there's need for some innovative partnerships so that the financing of the transformation can be achieved. Professor Nasioma, what are your thoughts on issues of partnerships? How can partnerships contribute to the transformation of food systems locally and even globally?
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this conference. Speaking out about food systems, it touches on many things. The transformation of food systems would entail not only the transformation in the way that we develop and sustain the human resource within those systems. But it also, as my colleague who has just spoken has said, it requires relooking at the funding regimes at all levels within the food system. But we also have another component that I think is important, the policy level within the food system that is equally critical. And within the African context, maybe is a little unique. The fact that we have a cultural setting, a cultural mindset in regard to food systems, and that touches on land ownership systems or regimes. And so as you look at all these, then you come to realize that for us to be able to transform these systems, we have to touch on several aspects. Some of them, we can do them, say at national level, but many others will require partnerships to bring the adequate transformation that we need. But at the core of it is the partnerships at the human resource development level. Partnerships that will touch on research, partnerships that will touch on training, training that is both leading to an increase of knowledge, but is also leading to an increase in the development of skills and innovation capacity. Many a time we talk about partnerships in terms of simply enhancing skills. My experience over the years is that skills without good academic knowledge will not enable you to develop into the future. It will help you to stay where you are comfortably without a problem. And partnerships in training, partnerships in research, partnerships in innovation become very critical tools in the development of human capacity so that it impacts food systems at all levels of production, of storage, of distribution and marketing, and even at policy development. It is possible now to be able to influence that. The kind of training that we have in most countries, again across Africa, we have a training that does not endear those who want knowledge in food systems to go and practice it, which is rather unfortunate. But by being able to partner with institutions, with organizations, both academic and research, that have had experience, it enables us to be able to share experiences and to develop our food systems, knowing that most African countries, take for example Kenya, it is in the tropical zone, and it has the potential to produce more food than it needs. And yet, because of the lack of shared knowledge and development of human capacity and policies that endear the growth of this sector of food systems, we do not produce enough food. And so you end up having over 31% of Kenyans being food insecure. So the aspect of partnerships between universities and between universities and research institutions, both locally and internationally, is a critical element. One of the problems that I think we have created, particularly here in Kenya, is we have separated universities from research institutions. And in so doing, we dichotomize the partnerships as well as research that go into this sector. That's an unfortunate component that makes us not only miss out on the exchange of ideas, but we miss out on the growth of the sector of food systems.
Thank you very much. Training is a very important curriculum agricultural production. However, if you look at many African countries, particularly, for example, in Kenya, you realize that university budgets at the national level have been dwindling downwards. So there is a problem of universities even being able to produce the skill base that is required, and also being able to churn out very important innovations, agricultural innovations, to be able to address the issue of food demand. Now, Professor Decker, there is the concern of agriculture being a science. So the science of agriculture and agricultural science. How can we be able to make sure that those innovations which are produced in the universities are popularized so that they can reach the farmers, particularly those who are in rural areas? The issue here at hand is that of commercialization of these technologies. How can that be achieved in a manner that helps to transform the food systems?
One of the biggest problems that I heard, I was pointing this out in what I just said earlier, is that there's many good ideas, but it's always against the wind if you want to have sustainable innovations. People are very traditional in trying to absorb new technologies, so both on the farmer side, but also on the commerce side. And companies tend to favor the products they have already on the shelf rather than the innovations, except for when there's a turning point, a critical point where the innovations become an advantage. And it's oftentimes that the companies rather shelve a lot of the innovations that are not directly economically an advantage. So when it comes to food production, of course, we over the decade we have been hijacking ecosystems for production, and that gives a direct return to companies, but it's on the deficit on the bill of ecosystems. What we really need is an incentive for companies to invest in sustainable transformations that allow for production in the long term. And I think Professor Nasiuma already pointed out policies are very critical in this aspect, and regulations. So with the rollback of, for example, in my field, very important, the use of rollback of pesticides and agrochemicals is a good development. But of course, it needs to come with new innovations to be fostered. And oftentimes they're not really balanced. So whereas they roll back the old scheme agrochemicals, the innovations are not given a good chance to establish themselves. And with that, you have the problem as well as of adoption. So even if there were companies to take it up, it still needs to be trickling down to the end users, and that takes a lot of time. But my first priority would be to, as a university, be very strong on the innovations you have, and also be a political player in policy making and regulation, and trying to change the way innovations are brought onto the market, and particularly sustainable innovations are given a chance. Yes, and some of these innovations may not directly result in quick bucks for companies, but because it's regulated, the other alternatives disappear on the market. Companies are anyways enticed to start propagating them into the field. I see many innovations coming out of the university, like I said before, but many of them end up in drawers instead of at the end user where they should be used. Yeah, I could go on this topic, but I think really important is to connect the knowledge institutes with regulation and policy making to propagate innovations properly. I mean, sustainable innovation, to propagate particularly sustainable innovations into use.
I absolutely agree, as it has been mentioned by Professor Decker. Innovation is a critical element to be brought into the food system. To try, as Professor Decker mentioned there, we are trying to address the whole question of sustainability of the food system. And that has to start right from the production. How are we producing our food? Are the means of production, the approach, the processes, the inputs, are they sustainable? Is that approach really sustainable? When we look at the kind of research that is going, majority of it is still looking at the 1960 green evolution technology, the use of fertilizer, the use of chemicals in production. We talk of smart agriculture, but when you look at what is smart, it is still talking of high external input. So we need to innovate and look outside the box, invent new approaches, and discover new ways and new means that we can use in food production, to be able to produce food in a sustainable manner, that we have a system that is inclusive of everybody, that is resilient when the droughts come, when the floods come. This system will remain resilient, and that it is sustainable. If we look in Kenya today, our food system, you just wonder who benefits from it. When we are trying to look for ways and means of how to bring about parity in development, parity in social system, parity in the economic area, our food system is dividing us. There are few people benefiting from the food system, and the majority are left, particularly the farmers, the small-scale farmers, who are struggling, and they are 70% in Kenya, producing food for the nation, they are coming out as the losers. So we need to innovate, and I think I do agree that funding is an issue. It is affecting research. It is affecting how we can model out and transform our curriculums. And it is an area that we need to look for. How do we source for funding to help us do research, to help us innovate in new ideas? Just a case, for example, in Baraka, ICSAP has been trying to do a research in the role and efficacy of microbacteria in food production. And we hope that we could be able to share this information with our partners and stakeholders and see how it can impact on the food system. So I think the universities, institutions of higher learning, we need to assess, let us assess the food system that we have, do a gap analysis, identify areas that need intervention, and that will create opportunity to look for what innovations we can bring on board, and then move on to the next level of engagement. The institutions of higher learning, we need to engage the stakeholders in the food system, including the policymakers. The other colleague who spoke earlier on mentioned the issue of governance. There's a big issue in the area of governance, and use the information that we can generate to influence the policy. But the innovation area is very critical, and we need to look for resources to be able to explore that area, because it is in innovation that we can develop a system that is resilient, it is inclusive, and will be sustainable.
To be global, because things have already been done elsewhere, and you cannot, reinvent the wheel. So, as we've had, partnerships are key. We need to have our scholars moving around to institutions which have facilities. There's no need of having similar facilities in so many universities or institutions. Facilities should be shared, and therefore partnerships, MOUs, both local, regional, and international, should be encouraged. Scholars moving from one area to another. But in Africa, I think what is key is that the scientists should be encouraged to do research that is for Africa. Many scientists But we should look at that the science or the agenda that we have, the research agenda for our food system should be what is solving our problems, but we should be able to go all over the place because other people come and do research for us. You can find that there are very many papers that are done by other people for us that would be useful, but sometimes it's on the shelf because by the time you discover that work was done, it was done by somebody from another country, and maybe the thesis was published in that country and it did not serve us. So I think there need to be a way to have incentives and rewards so that people actually do research that is based on the African agenda and yet be able to go and do it elsewhere where the facilities are available. Thank you.
Thank you. As has been rightly said, research within the agricultural systems and food systems as a whole is a critical aspect. And it's also good to note that most of the research in Kenya is not funded by the Kenya government. It's funded by donors. And so donors have their own agenda of what they want to accomplish.
Government institutions, for example, the National Bureau of Statistics, the kind of information that they collect sometimes just scratches agriculture on the back. And as a result, you realize that much of the policies that are being checked out relating to higher education, most developing countries, Kenya being one of them, is to emphasize on the STEM subjects, hard core sciences, and that does not include agriculture. Now, how the data that comes out of research so that we try to influence policymakers to give some prominence to agriculture. Now that agriculture is going to be the backbone of feeding the growing population. Madam Alice.
Wow. I think what you've said is really, we need to find a way to make agriculture stand out so that it can be considered as one of the core core subjects in our institutions. And since we have been doing a lot of research, and maybe, I don't know whether because of the way we do our research, and as it has been said, the research is mainly for promotion or for you to move on to, get a job.
It's very hard to see where it goes wrong, but there's a way, there's some mileage. I'm not quite sure what's the difference between utilization and adoption, to be honest. I don't get the difference.
I think it's an interesting way of looking at it. Utilization and adoption. I think a lot of focus is normally put on adoption so that it is eventually utilized. So that's part of the process. There are two steps of more to it. But, when you have come up with your innovation, the intellectual property framework, I think, has been well developed, especially in Kenya. But most researchers are not very much aware of the processes involved, because we have professionals currently that can help one to develop the innovation so that it is protected. And that way you have the freedom and the ease to get it adopted for utilization or commercialized, first of all. And once it is commercialized, because the private sector entity that picks it up is interested in a business that gives good returns. And so they will help in disseminating that whole idea for its utilization, because they have to show that it is workable. Unfortunately, as I mentioned before, because of the disconnect between the consumer and the researcher, you find that the conditions under which the researcher operates are relatively different from the conditions under which the farmer operates. And so the farmer gets suspicious to be able to pick up the idea and utilize it. So I think when we are talking about innovations, we have to look at the two arms that go with it as we stand at the point of research. The arm of the person who can commercialize it, and the arm of the consumer, who is the farmer. And by so doing and engaging both of them and involving them within that system, then we'll have both going together, the adoption and the utilization. If we leave the farmer out, we'll have problems with the utilization, even if we get the adoption in place. I don't know if I'm looking to what he was talking about.